Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
It's our custom to introduce ourselves at this point, and so first I'd like to ask if there's anybody in the room who is new to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Could you just tell us your name?
I'm Jose.
Welcome, Jose.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm Noam.
No, welcome, Noah. And anybody online here for the first time or returning after the absence? Shane, could you unmute and just say hello?
Hello, my name is Shane. I'm from Santa Cruz, California. I'm really happy to be here today.
Thank you. Welcome. So at this point, my name is Henry, and why don't we introduce ourselves?
My name is Alex.
Luis. Still no.
Clark.
Lee.
Jeff.
My name is Jerry.
Stephen.
Matthew.
Bill.
John.
I'm Joe.
George. I think I have.
My name is Cass.
I'm Stephen.
Jose.
I'm Johnny.
Jim.
Morgan.
Donald.
Yes, and speaking of Donald, it's my privilege to introduce Donald Rothberg. Donald is a PhD and a member of the Teachers Council at Spirit Rock Center and a teacher at the East Bay Meditation Center. Donald teaches retreats and groups on concentration and insight meditation practice, loving kindness practice, transforming the judgmental mind, mindful communication, working skillfully with conflict, and socially engaged Buddhism. He has practiced insight meditation since 1976 and has also received training in Tibetan Dzogchen, body-based psychotherapy, and trauma work. He has helped to guide many 6-month to 2-year training programs in socially engaged spirituality, both Buddhist-based and interfaith, and is the author of The Engaged Spiritual Life, a Buddhist approach to transforming ourselves and the world. By the way, you can obtain a copy out there.
If you get one, I'll sign it.
And is also the co-editor of Ken Wilber in Dialogue. And he has a website, donaldrothberg.com. Take it away, Donald.
Yeah, thank you, Henry, and great to be back here. I think I have not been here in person since before the pandemic. I've been online, and I value my own long-time connection with Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Really, there's been an association pretty much since the beginning. Yeah, I think as many of you know, GBF came out of a summer program that I co-organized for the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, and we had, anyway, I won't go into that so much, but it's a long-time connection that's important for me. And so today, I want to explore, surprise, surprise, the theme of reactivity. Maybe a surprise for people online. I gave a handout so people know a theme related to the talk, that I want to explore really what's right at the center of Buddhist practice, which is the transformation of reactivity, and I'll explain that in a moment. And I want to briefly talk about how that is at the center, and then be very practical and talk about 10 ways of transforming reactivity. So let me give a little bit of background and even give a definition of reactivity, which is important. One of the last talks that I gave here in person before the pandemic was a talk about the meaning of dukkha, which is the term in the Pali language that's usually translated as suffering. And I gave that talk here, and it was actually transcribed and published in the newsletter. And for me, it's an important talk because there can be a lot of confusion, even in the core teaching of the Four Noble Truths. Because the Buddha, in that teaching, talks about dukkha in the first truth and talks about the end of dukkha in the third truth. But we can ask, what is dukkha? And there's confusion because in the actual text, there are at least 4 meanings of dukkha. And some, the most common one, I won't go into it so much, but the most common one is simply the presence of the unpleasant, usually translated as suffering. And yet we can ask the question, what does it mean to end suffering? Maybe when we heard the teachings for the first time, the end of suffering sounds pretty good. Anyone relate to that? But what does it mean? It doesn't mean the end of unpleasant experiences. It doesn't mean the end of difficult body experiences, mind experiences, interpersonal experiences, social experiences, etc. It doesn't mean that. Those continue. The Buddha, when he was older, had a bad back. He also sometimes had headaches. I'm glad that wasn't censored out of the teachings, right? But what that meant is that he was having unpleasant experiences, but presumably he related to them in a different way. And what I showed I hope in that talk several years ago, was that the most important meaning of dukkha for understanding what the end of dukkha means is dukkha as reactivity. What does reactivity mean? It's brought out especially in 2 core teachings. One of them is the teaching of the 2 arrows, sometimes translated as the 2 darts. How many of you know that teaching? Yeah. I usually mention it in half of my talk, so you've heard me, you've heard it. Probably. And so the teaching of the 2 arrows goes like this. The Buddha asked, everyone at times experiences unpleasant experiences. What differentiates a mature practitioner from a non-practitioner? They didn't answer his question, so as was commonly the occurrence, he answered his own question, and he said, yes, everyone actually at times has unpleasant experiences. In that, no difference between a mature practitioner and a non-practitioner. Could relate to the Buddha's headaches, right? Everyone at times has unpleasant experience. And he says that having an unpleasant experience is like being shot by an arrow. And he called that the first arrow. What differentiates the mature practitioner from the non-practitioner is whether one shoots a second arrow at oneself or others, as if this would somehow help get rid of the first arrow. In other words, when we have difficult physical experiences, unpleasant physical experiences, we may tense around the unpleasant experiences, as if that would somehow help. And it doesn't actually. And actually, research on some forms of chronic pain shows that as much as 80% of what people experience as chronic pain is the reactivity, the tensing, the second arrow. And so, not surprisingly, bringing mindfulness into areas of chronic pain was actually the first place where there was a bringing of mindfulness into the medical area. Because if you can reduce that 80%, you still have the 20%, but if you reduce the 80%, it makes a huge difference. And I think we also know what that second arrow looks like. I have something difficult happen in my experience, and maybe I blame myself, I blame another. That's the second arrow, right? Someone says something I don't like, and I go right back and say something mean to that person. That's the second arrow. That's reactivity, right? And that happens on all sorts of levels. It happens individually. It happens relationally. It happens between groups. It happens socially. A lot of social conflicts are two groups shooting second arrows at each other. Right? And I would actually interpret the teachings about nonviolence as very, very similar to the Buddhist teaching coming out of Gandhi and King. They say, we have received pain. We will not pass on the pain. We will try to stop that cycle of, call it reactivity, of shooting arrows at each other. Right? Another core teaching where this comes out is the teaching of dependent origination. The central part of it where the Buddha talks about how with every experience we have, every sense experience, we have a what's called a feeling tone, a sense of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That's a given. So sometimes we have pleasant experiences, sometimes we have unpleasant experiences. That happens with every moment. Most experiences that we have are neutral. And then he said, when we're not aware, when we're not mindful, and we have our habitual conditioning in a certain area of our lives, we will tend, because of the pleasant experience, to want it to be there more and to grab hold of it. I have a pleasant taste when I'm eating. My mind might naturally just say, reach without thinking for the second piece of cake. Probably a few of us have done it. Or something similar, some kind of pleasant experience. Problem isn't the pleasant experience, it's the unconsciousness and the habitual nature of it. I worked once with a group, and I told them, pleasant experience, not at all the problem. The Buddha said actually pleasant experience is very important just for feeling good, etc. And I said, the pleasant experience is not the problem. We could just sit here next time in our group and have, cookies and chocolate cake the whole time. And it wouldn't necessarily be a problem. And they said, well, let's try it. So we did. And we explored what it's like to be with the pleasant with, a little more consciousness. Same thing with the unpleasant. When we're not aware, this is probably what comes to mind more readily and matches the teaching of the two arrows. When we're not aware, we will tend, with the unpleasant, to not want it to be there and then go into trying to push it away. We do that at the level of the body. We do that at the level of the mind, like with some of the examples I gave. We do that interpersonally, and so forth. The way I'm defining reactivity is the shooting of the second arrow, which is more about the unpleasant, but it's also the grabbing hold of the pleasant and the pushing away the unpleasant at the level of the body, thoughts, interpersonally, etc. So I could do a whole talk on that, but that's the quick account of what reactivity is. And so I would say this is actually a clearer way of talking about the Four Noble Truths. And I prefer reactivity as opposed to suffering. I used to define suffering and give kind of a technical definition of suffering. That suffering is like the shooting of the second arrow, right? And you can do that. Some teachers do that. But because pain and suffering are not always differentiated in normal English, I think probably the cognate in other languages, then it can be confusing. So I prefer to talk about reactivity and would say that this is right at the heart of the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, and that's at the heart of the Buddha's teaching. I teach dukkha and the end of dukkha. And it's the primary meaning. So that being said, how do we work with and practice with reactivity? That's the rest of my talk. Given that account of reactivity, what are ways of practicing? And in the handout, I mentioned 10. And I'll try to be brief with these and go through them. So number 1 is understand the nature of reactivity. And it's really to remember especially these 2 wisdom teachings I mentioned, the teaching of the 2 arrows, which goes so far in our practice. When I work individually with people, the most common guidance I give to them is you've had something difficult or painful happen to you. Watch out for the shooting of the second arrow, like blaming yourself, blaming someone else, telling negative narratives to yourself, etc. Very, very common, right? It's the most common guidance I give. And so remembering the teaching of the 2 arrows, remembering the teaching of that movement from contact to grasping or pushing away, how pleasant or unpleasant. That's a very simple expression of the teachings. Remembering those teachings, and also know that the reactivity can occur individually as well as relationally and collectively, right? That one of my colleagues, David Loy, has very helpfully pointed out that he doesn't use language of reactivity, but the grabbing hold, which we sometimes call greed, and the pushing away can get institutionalized. Right? That's part of reactivity. It's not just individual. Reactivity gets institutionalized, as we know very much. It's happening right now, right, with the institutionalization of all the legislation in a lot of states, anti-LGBTQI, anti-trans, all that stuff. That's institutionalizing ill will in a way. And of course, it occurs in racism, and we can also, in a way, we could say that in many ways, the economic system institutionalizes greed. Right? I remember an account of a downturn on Wall Street, and a trader said, there are 2 cycles around here. Most of the time, we're in what I call a greed cycle. When we have downturn, then we have a fear cycle, right? And that's it, right? So, and again, there are a lot of nuances to this, so I'm oversimplifying. But the larger point is to say that when we think of reactivity, it can be there individually, it can be there relationally between people, and it also can be there more socially and collectively, institutionalized. And so first way of practicing is remember the teachings. Let them guide one. A second important guideline when reactivity comes up in the moment is to assess the level of reactivity that's occurring. I like to use a 1 to 10 scale, and if it is in the workable range, maybe not a 9 or a 10, then we can actually, this goes to the 3rd guideline, we can actually bring mindfulness to it, study it, look at it. But if it's a 9 or a 10, or maybe related to trauma or something like that, it's really important to know that, because if it's a really high-level reactivity, we need another response. Mindfulness won't be a skillful response necessarily. It would be what helps get me deactivated, or what helps me to come back to balance would be the question. Really important caveat, not always given historically in mindfulness training. I went through a trauma training, and a lot of people who had backgrounds of trauma mentioned how even in retreats or in training, they were told, just stay with it. That's not wise when it's a 9 or a 10 or where there's activation. We know that better now. But that's an important dimension of practice. Third guideline, when it's in the workable range, be mindful of reactivity. Study one's own patterns. Know what your top 5 are. If we were doing this in multiple weeks, that would be the homework for next week. Study your top 5, or maybe I should just back up. Get a list of what are your top 5. Name them. Look out for them. And then when reactivity comes in the moment and it's in the workable range, explore it. Do what we call in our practice inquiry or investigation. What's it like in the body? What's it like in the mind? What triggers it? Really to get to know it well. When we get to know it well, then maybe we're going to a family situation, and we say, I might be triggered because I know that I've studied. Like for me, one of my triggers is I don't think someone is listening to me. Very common, right? How many can relate to that? And I can know I'm going to a situation where that might be likely, right? And I can actually prepare and have some sense. Okay, when that happens, I may go here or be mindful or have a bathroom break and come back to center or whatever. Okay, so that's the third guideline, is really noticing. We don't so much get rid of reactivity, is that we notice it sooner, and it has less impact, or does less damage, so to speak. The patterns of reactivity are in the brain, and they can still, when we're stressful, get activated. But the way that mindfulness especially helps, we notice them sooner, hopefully closer to the beginning. That's how the practice works. Okay. Number 4 is sometime in our practice, be with the pleasant and the unpleasant. And one guidance I often give is, like for a given meditation period, say if a workable level of pleasant or unpleasant occurs, that's sort of moderate level or greater, study what it's like. Notice with the pleasant whether there's a tendency to grab. Notice with the unpleasant, which is typically a little easier, whether there's a tendency for the mind to go to reactivity in some way, right? Just to notice that. And it's really to bring the exploration of the pleasant or unpleasant into our practice. Number 5. And I'm intending to get through these and then have a good chunk of time for talking together. So, number 5. It's really to have a regular heart practice. The heart practices are loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. Those are the traditional ones, and I also would bring in forgiveness and gratitude, and also empathy. I like to teach empathy as a kind of an interpersonal practice. And I think having one heart practice as a regular part of one's practice is really, really crucial. I mentioned 7 of them, but just need one. And practice it at least 10 minutes a day. That will go a very long way. That hopefully can be doable. And you can also practice these. Like I practice loving kindness, especially when I go swimming. I do I swim several times a week. I do lap swimming, and I do loving kindness as I do laps, one being per lap. And I have my rotation. Anyway, but you can do loving kindness. It works very easily when you take a walk. Some people do it when they're driving, and so forth. Or just do it. Anyway, the heart practices are really important because, in part, as we, a lot of our looking into reactivity is actually going into something that's a little painful. And if we're doing that a fair amount, we need to have some balance to go into what's painful, and having compassion or loving kindness in the territory helps give us balance. So it's not, I'm going into pain again in my meditation. Okay, right? So it's more like we have some time for just holding ourselves and maybe others with the warmth. So again, I assume, how many people have a regular heart practice? Yeah, I think it's common. If you don't, 10 minutes will go a long way, because it also, sometimes when the level of intensity is like more than 9 or a 10, actually bringing up the loving kindness can be a way to move out of it. Like middle of the night, you wake up, something didn't go well yesterday, you're blaming or judging yourself. Anyone ever had that experience? And going to a heart practice can really be beautiful. Just notice that happen and go right there, not to let it repeat for half an hour in the middle of the night. It can be really, really helpful. And so that can really be crucial. And then sometimes we can, when we're caught in reactivity, we can say, okay, I'm caught. Let me deliberately go into one of the heart practices now as an antidote. Okay, number 6. This is a big one, and often our reactivity is linked with some insight or intelligence. And so the aim of reactivity is not going to be to suppress the reactivity, just get rid of it. That doesn't really work. Although in the moment, sometimes that's helpful, just in the moment, short term, just to come back to center. But because a lot of our reactivity is connected with insight, and I'll give some examples, the aim is to transform the reactivity, not just to get rid of it and suppress it. What does that mean? Some examples. Let's suppose I have a lot of reactivity because a friend didn't keep an agreement, right? Anyone ever have that? Okay. And so what I noticed is important. Person didn't keep an agreement. Ideally, what I want to, depends on the nature of the relationship, but in a lot of relationships, what I want to do is actually work through internally my own reactivity and then go talk to the person about what happened as much as possible without reactivity, right? Or, with a social issue, I can have a lot of reactivity about something that's unjust or not right socially, right? I can have a lot of reactivity. The aim isn't to suppress that, but it's to do my inner work and then see if I can respond to the situation without reactivity. Not always very easy for either of those situations, but it points to the way that what we're looking for is transforming the reactivity by transforming the reactivity so we separate out the reactivity from the insight. We do transform and the reactivity ends for the most part, but then we keep the insight and use it for the purposes of compassionate action. So that's crucial. And actually, I actually hear teachers at times, colleagues sometimes say, for example, one of the main forms of reactivity is becoming very judgmental. towards oneself or others. And I hear sometimes people say, judgments are bad, get rid of them. That's, for me, a problem. We want to transform the judgmental mind, not get rid of it. Because the judgmental mind often carries a lot of insight. That's why it has so much hold on us, right? Oh, I'm right. Therefore, whatever. Something like that, right? Okay. So that's a big one. You know, and that can also be applied socially. And so, number 7, this is a little more simply. In reactivity, we shoot the second arrow. We learn not to do it. We learn alternatives. Sometimes it could be something happened. I notice myself repeating a narrative over and over again, and we say to ourselves, I'm not going to go there. It's as simple as that sometimes, just to say, I'm not going to go there. You know, but that depends on mindfulness. If we're not mindful, we won't notice it, and it'll just keep on happening. Right? Okay, that's a reason for regular mindfulness. Number 8, in reactivity, we're on automatic, typically. We're on automatic, we're in habitual mind, and so one thing that's helpful when we notice reactivity is to come to it with conscious intention. Bring consciousness and intention to the whole area. That's number 8. Okay, I'm getting there. Number 9, and this also is a little more complex. A lot of our reactivity depends on patterns that we've had that go very deep and often go way back in our lives, often to childhood. Right? A lot of our most common patterns of reactivity are very old, like my pattern of getting into reactivity when I think that person's not understanding me. And it's related to, old patterns about not feeling I belong and no one understands me and so forth. Those are very old patterns, right? And we probably each of us have our versions of those. Maybe some similarity maybe to what I named, but there are many, many of them. I use the language of calling those limiting beliefs. And they're common, and this is a sort of a depth dimension of working with reactivity. Part of our work with reactivity, and this can take some time, is to go deeper into our patterns of reactivity and identify those limiting beliefs. And I imagine a lot of people have been doing that for a long time. It might be that's also the territory sometimes of psychotherapy and so forth. How many people can relate to that? It's been a big part of your practice, yeah. And we can keep on doing that. This is from the poet Rilke. No one lives his life disguised since childhood, haphazardly assembled from voices and fears and little pleasures. We come of age as masks. Our true face never speaks. And so a lot of our practice is identifying those masks and letting the true voice speak more and more. It's a way of talking about our practice. Again, and there are individual limiting beliefs, there are collective limiting beliefs, and we internalize them even if we disagree with them, related to, homophobia or age or ethnicity or race. Those are part of the field. And number 10, also a lot and complex, is that we learn to develop non-reactive ways of speaking and acting and integrate that with our practice. So we integrate that with our inner work. This is where, again, the model is of combining inner work with reactivity with outer response. And we learn, wise speech in the Buddhist tradition, skillful communication, ways to work with differences and conflicts, social action, that is increasingly not based in reactivity, which is, can be challenging. How do we do that? And it's, in a lot of social movements, maybe even what first takes us into a social movement is the reactivity, because it's connected with the insight into injustice, let's say. But, I would say that a healthy social movement is going to have a way to work with and transform the reactivity, because otherwise it actually, probably many of us know, can really influence negatively the social movement. When I once did a workshop for a conference on spiritual activism, and I asked, what's the most common issue? And the majority issue named was, within our organization, we get on each other's cases a lot. That's what came to mind for them. Interesting. They didn't talk about, that's what they mentioned first of all. Of course, there are a lot of levels to this, but that's the 10th. So this is our practice. This I think is right at the heart of our practice, and how to work with this. We might take one or two of these at a time and work with them for a week, right? Or this could be work with each of them for a month. It could be a 10-month curriculum. But when we're doing that, we know that we're practicing right at the heart. I think this is the heart of the whole 2,600-year-old tradition. And of course, it overlaps with other spiritual approaches and traditions. This is right at the heart. This is, again, in my mind, a simpler way even of talking about this than the Four Noble Truths. And so, let me end there. And appreciate your kind attention, and we can open things up to talking together. Maybe how about just a moment of quiet, see what may have resonated with you, see if any questions came up, or maybe a sharing of some way you've worked skillfully with reactivity. So thanks. Any sharing, question? We have a little bit over 10 minutes by my clock. And when we say your name?
My name's Clark, and I think it was 2004 that you led a loving kindness retreat with Sylvia.
Oh yeah.
January maybe.
Yeah.
That was the first time I heard you teach, and I went to one of your days working with judgments sometime in that 2-year period, and get a little follow-up at your house and stuff. And
oh, wow, yeah.
I was so happy that you talked about the swimming part, which is transformative for me. So I teach negotiation, which involves kind of nonviolent communication, but a kind of violent place in law school. And so what I do is having heard someone describe, I think it was in your Wednesday group, the swim practice.
Yeah.
So I have my list of my 16 students that I would see, and I swim.
You're 16?
16 students. So before I swim, I put the list there.
Oh, wow.
And then each lap, I use a different student.
Oh, wow.
And so as my arm goes in, I'll go, may you be peaceful, may you be kind to yourself, may you appreciate yourself. It's like breathe in like threes typically. Those are the 3 phrases. And it's kind of interesting that most of the time, it's fine, but what's interesting is, for me at least, I think the way of describing it as well, so sometimes something negative will come up that's kind of surprising to me, so I'm wishing the student well, and then I realize, I'm kind of annoyed about this, and it comes up. Sometimes I can predict it, like the student's kind of annoying, I'm aware of that, my experience is annoying. But I think it's kind of a purification process.
That's right.
And so I find that really helpful. So I guess I wanted to share that, how helpful that practice has been for me, of doing it with swimming. And when I'm not teaching during the summer, I use different people I'm going to encounter that day. So I see the encounter, and then when there's something might happen that's yeah, it's like would be triggering. Otherwise, it feels to me as if there's this fog. What would it be? This like frame of kindness, or this like bank of kindness that's there. So I wanted to ask you a question. It's just like I find this list is super helpful, and I like the idea of like practicing with 1 month or something. But recently you were also on one of Dan Brown's last retreats.
What's that?
You were on one of Dan Brown's virtual retreats.
Yeah.
I was on like a bunch of those through when he was doing it. And so I noticed that as I'm looking at this list, I noticed there are 2 things that mean a lot to me that I think overlap with you in part that aren't here, and might be. So I'm just curious why they're not here. I think they're less central. So one of them is like a body practice. Mm-hmm. So like whether it's yoga, it's mindful, or just a swimming without that. And the other one is something of the which you talked about in your Wednesday group. Sometimes the awakened awareness tradition, either from Dan's, the Bon and Tibetan traditions, or from the Thai Forest Monastery tradition. And so I'm just like curious why those things aren't here. I sort of suspect I know, but I'm curious.
Yeah. So there's a lot there. First of all, great to have a swimming compatriot. We have definitely now a swimming team, and sharing the experiences of bringing loving kindness or metta to swimming, and then also noticing that things come up, and we often frame the heart practices as having aspects of purification. They're not designed to just say, okay, I will right now be incredibly loving. It's not like that, right? It's more we go in that direction with our practice, but then it's almost like at different moments things come up that are really, in a way, blocking the heart, or that come with the same territory. May you be happy, but here are some ways that you could get it together. Something like that, right? And so we call that purification, like we named it. Yeah, and then in terms of things not on my list of 10, by having 10 ways, even though in many traditions when you have 10 it's meant to be complete. Like, I haven't heard a lot of critique of the 10 Commandments. Hey, you left out! What's going on? And so, I'm very aware that I could have a list of 50 ways of working with reactivity, and that all of what I might have. So I was selective here, and they tend to be more ones that we could start with, right? And so that's why some things like talking about awakened or non-dual awareness is not on the list. It's not a beginning practice, right? One works up to it. And but I think, it could be, I think having a body practice could be something that might deserve inclusion on the list. I think that's really crucial because, I like to encourage. I think I mentioned, like when we are mindfully studying a pattern of reactivity, study it at the level of the body. And so for a lot of us, having a body practice is crucial because it helps us to just be more aware of the bodies. Like when I grew up, even though I actually was a competitive swimmer, but I wasn't really aware of my body, even though I was, very physically active. And, it took later, coming into my 20s and 30s to really start, doing yoga and stuff. So I would take that as really actually helpful for the next version of this. Yeah, please, Jeff.
Is it skillful to ask what the origin of these reactions are, or is that just more thinking, more mind? Yeah,
is it skillful to ask what are the sources of the reactivity? I'll give you a few responses to that. We could use the sense of source in a few ways. I think it's very helpful as part maybe of reflection to ask what was the trigger, or what was the what happened that triggered my reactivity. Like my sense, of I have the thought that person's not listening to me or not understanding me, maybe a comment. And that's really helpful to know what triggers the reactivity, because then when and we can often, and that does involve some reflection, and that can happen after the fact, right? We can, at the end of the day, say, okay, what were some major places where there was reactivity? Okay, what triggered it? Let me reflect on that one. That person said this, right? That can be really helpful, not to think about it for hours, but just to ask that question. That can be really helpful. And then in the sense of looking at what I was calling limiting beliefs, that can sometimes be helpful. Oh, here are some of the roots of my sense of, people don't understand me, right? That can be helpful and could be part of psychotherapy. And, if I'd be doing one-on-one work, not a lot of thinking, but over time knowing, okay, I know that comes from early childhood, these kind of experiences or whatever. And that can be useful to know, because partly we can understand that it's deep conditioning, and that it's, we've repeated the same neural pathways 3 million times. It has some energy, right? And yet, because of neuroplasticity, it can be transformed, right? Surprisingly quickly sometimes, right? Even though it's been repeated so many times. So that's useful sometimes to go back like that. And then I think also can be useful really to know, okay, here's the place where what I was calling insight or intelligence or validity is mixed up with my reactivity. To identify that, I think that's also very useful. It's not so much the cause, but that is useful to know, because then we can say, okay, let me preserve, that person didn't keep the agreement. That's important. But let me preserve that, but then work with the reactivity. Yeah. And we have time for one more, I think. Should we finish in 2 minutes? 2 or 3 minutes? Okay, please.
Thank you very much for this your guidance in this.
You're welcome.
I recently had experience, and one of the things that can get triggered in me is feeling like I'm an outsider, like I don't belong.
Yeah.
And like I'm not connected, like I'm excluded somehow.
Yeah.
And I think that goes down to a really deep, not just circumstantial and social political, because I'm a gay man, my experiences around that, but to a deep fear that has to do with survival.
Of survival.
And, so there's that kind of primal level to it.
Yeah.
And then in working with it, it was my relationship to a group and the power structure in the group, which I found myself almost slipping into a paranoid fantasy that there's a secret cabal organizing, and I realized, that's kind of on the political level, that's what's happening. So there's kind of playing on that fear. Anyway, but as I worked through it, I found like my experience, and as I recognized it and investigated it, my experience in the group shifted.
Your experience
in the group shifted.
Yeah.
I realized that I saw it in a whole different way.
Yeah.
So in a way, there wasn't any need to speak about it or work it through with other people.
Yeah.
It's just it was so strong that it was affecting my perception of what was actually going on in the moment.
Yeah.
So
beautiful. Beautiful. So again, there's a lot in what you shared, but knowing that some of our patterns of reactivity do go back to survival. It can be very, very deep, and some of that could be passed on even intergenerationally in different ways, and a lot of different dimensions to it. And so seeing that can give some appreciation. And then, what I didn't mention so much, but what I work with a lot when I teach on transforming the judgmental mind, is what that transformation looks like, which for you is happening experientially in the group, right? You were, the old pattern was there, but you were developing like a sense of belonging that was really, in a way, developing, we could say, at the level of the brain, new neural pathways, right? I belong here. I'm connected, right? And so even though those patterns might come up, something with the big picture is changing, right? And so that's part of the transformation process, and very beautiful. And sometimes it just happens, like in a new situation, a new relationship, whatever. And sometimes we want consciously to go in that direction. Sometimes both, right? So it's, thank you for that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I could keep on for the next hour. I love this exploration. Like I say, it gets right at the heart of so much. So thank you.
Thank you, Donald. And just like to put in a pitch, if anybody in this room or on Zoom would like to interact more with Donald, one opportunity is our retreat, which is October 20th to 22nd in SoCal, California.
In the beautiful Santa Cruz Mountains.
In the beautiful Santa Cruz Mountains. So check out our website and enroll.
I can add on to that. Right now we have no private rooms available. We have 4 spaces and 2 double rooms available. So if you're interested, come see me at the reception hour.
Any camping sites available?
They're all gone.
They're all gone, huh?
Yeah, so it's pretty well booked already. Any other announcements?
Yes, I'm the host today, and please stay and enjoy the company of the Sangha. There are refreshments and hot water for tea, and if you use a cup, you can just put it in the sink and I'll take care of it. I'll be going around with the Dana Bowl to accept contributions to cover our expenses. Your generosity is appreciated. Donations in the range of $10 to $20 help the Sangha meet its expenses. These include honorarium for our Dharma speakers, rent for this beautiful center. Hopefully in the future we will start the monthly dinners at Larkin Street Youth Services. Also our quarterly newsletter mailed mostly to people in prison. There's a newcomer sign-up sheet on the credenza if you wish to be included and receive our Sangha membership directory. Please sign up and include contact information you wish to share with the group. And some members go out for lunch after the meeting. Everyone is welcome to join them. The group meets at the front door around 12:30.
I'll just mention 2 upcoming events. One of them is an online 2-day retreat. It's the weekend before our retreat in the Santa Cruz Mountains, so it may be too much, but it's 2 days online through Spirit Rock. It's on the theme of developing skillful speech and empathy amidst differences and conflicts. So relevant to our times. And then secondly, I'll be doing another version, a 6-day non-residential retreat in Berkeley on transforming the judgmental mind in February, in the first half of February. And, it's reasonably near BART, so you could, so it also being non-residential, the cost will be less than a residential retreat. It'll go like 9 to 5 for 6 days in a row, and 10, 15-minute walk from BART. So I think February 6 to 11. So with Eve Decker also.
A few years ago, you said you were working on a book about transforming the judgmental mind. Are you still, or?
I'm still doing it. Yeah, or I don't know if I'm still working on it, but it still needs work. I think I'm intending to finish it in the next 9 months. And I'm going to put in the preface or introduction. If I had done less internal work with my own judgmental mind, the book would have been finished much earlier.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the support.
Any other announcements? Donald, do you want to, will you lead us in the dedication of merit?
Sure.
Thanks. Let's stand for the dedication of merit.
May the benefits of our time together support ourselves, support our practice in known and unknown ways. May our time together be of benefit to those in our own circles in known and unknown ways. And then beyond our own circles, may we offer the benefits of our time together to all beings, the ultimate horizon of our practice. May we offer the benefits of our time together to all beings in known and unknown ways, knowing that we are part of all beings. Yay. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.